While the hearings continued on Capitol Hill today, President Reagan went back out on the road to talk the budget again. The president has not ignored Colonel North's fifth day of testimony. Here's our White House correspondent, Sam Donaldson.
Today's audience to hear the president's budget reform speech was the National Association of County Officials meeting in Indianapolis. But in addition to economic matters, the president included a curious challenge to his critics that suggested he is sensitive to the charge that he's built his presidency more on style than substance.
Critics have claimed that in opposing our administration on the issues, there is some kind of an unfair disadvantage, that this presidency is somehow based more on personality than on policy. So I invite my critics, I welcome my critics, to go after me on the issues just as hard as they please.
When he returned to the White House at mid-afternoon, the president retired to his living quarters to watch some of his critics, as well as his defenders, argue the issues on television at the Iran-Contra hearing. White House officials continue to believe Colonel North has helped the Contra's cause with his testimony. And it turns out that they are now considering asking Congress not just for another year's appropriation of money for the Contras, but for another 18 months' worth to cover the lifespan of the Reagan administration. The State Department's Elliott Abrams is talking in terms of 140 to 150 million over 18 months for the Contras, with the request going up to Capitol Hill soon. Although Colonel North may have been an effective advocate for the Contras, there are more witnesses to come and the mood could swing. So there are no plans for the president himself to speak out anytime soon for more money for the Contras. For the moment, at least, Mr. Reagan will continue to do battle with his critics on the issue of the budget. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, the White House.
Here's something will not come as a surprise. While millions of Americans have been watching these hearings, they've also been watching very closely in Nicaragua. Here's ABC's Peter Collins.
Television pictures of the hearings come down from the satellite every day into government headquarters in Managua. They are carefully monitored, and the main points are summarized for top Sandinista leaders. But there's no Ali Mina. A carefully edited version of his comments makes it onto the government-controlled Sandinista TV every night. For example, the headline one night was that CIA Chief Casey was the brains of the operation.
El problema es que Casey está muerto.
The problem is Casey is dead. President Ortega's view of it follows quickly. Colonel North is trying to protect President Reagan to the last, but if the president didn't know about it, he should resign. Colonel North's impassioned defense of the Contras, not surprisingly, does not get on TV or into the government-controlled newspapers. When American media ask for comment, the Sandinistas often respond with the familiar Harvard-trained voice of Alejandro Bendaña.
It's not a question of a secret government within a government. It's a question of government itself. It's not a question of policy making, but policy. There could not have been an Ali without a Ronnie.
Although the hearings will affect the war and Nicaragua's future, they are not a national obsession, and the news is now on the inside pages. As the war continues this summer, the emphasis is on battle reports. Peter Collins, ABC News, Miami.
When we come back, a man who was one of the president's closest advisors, and he goes on trial in Washington today. Michael Deaver, who used to be one of the president's most influential advisors and who remains a close personal friend, went on trial today in Washington. Deaver's trial began on charges that he lied to a grand jury and a subcommittee of the House investigating his work as a lobbyist after he left the White House. Here's ABC's Dennis Trout.
The former White House aide, accompanied by his wife, appeared today for court proceedings after months of efforts to have the case against him dismissed, including a constitutional challenge to the independent counsel. As jury selection got underway, the court presented a witness list including the Secretaries of State, Defense, even the President and Mrs. Reagan, though it's not certain they'll be called to testify. Deaver was the Reagan administration's master publicist for 5 years, arranging grand backdrops for the president from conventions to the cliffs of Normandy. After leaving the White House, he so successfully ran a lobbying business that Congress and a grand jury began investigating whether he was illegally using his executive branch contacts to help his clients, such as Canada on the acid rain issue and Rockwell International on the B-1 bomber. Deaver was not indicted on ethics law violations, but for perjury, allegedly lying to the grand jury and to Congress about possibly illegal contacts with administration officials.
I am confident I have not committed perjury and that I will be acquitted after a trial.
Defense lawyers claim the independent counsel is trying to convict Deaver of perjury by, quote, smearing him, because there's little evidence that his lobbying itself was illegal. If convicted, Deaver faces $34,000 in fines and 25 years in prison. Dennis Trout, ABC News, Washington.
Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger says the startup of the American operation to reflag Kuwaiti tankers in the Persian Gulf is imminent. ABC's Bob Zelnick reports from the Pentagon, however, the administration has privately assured key members of Congress the operation will not begin for at least a week. That apparently gives the UN Security Council time to vote on a ceasefire resolution in the Iran-Iraq war. For much of the day, there's been a last-ditch effort underway to head off the first strike ever by the Directors Guild of America. They are the people who direct movies and television broadcasts, including this one. The directors say they will strike 2 movie studios and NBC tomorrow morning. The other movie producers threaten a lockout if the directors do strike, and the other television networks, including this one, could be affected as well. In tonight's Money Matters on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrials lost 3 points today. The trading was moderate. When we come back, a status report on the inner cities 20 years after the summer of 1967.